His turnaround of a struggling Nigerian bank gained him wealth and acclaim in Africa's financial industry.
When you envision and take position and that vision comes through, then significant opportunities crystallize.
He's now focused on the movement to bring electricity to the majority of Africans. And he's investing in Africa's next generation of entrepreneurs. And you have 5 daughters?
Yes.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
But for me, we're training all of them for the competitive world we see ahead of us.
This week on African Voices, hear the story of Nigerian businessman and philanthropist Tony Elumelu. When we caught up with Tony Elumelu, he was in the United States making the rounds in the nation's capital, almost like a U.S. politician. But the Nigerian Economist is not in Washington, D.C. to talk politics. He has a different message.
Whilst electricity is a constant in a place like America and other developing parts of the world, in Africa, it's a very scarce commodity. I know that the investment opportunities in Africa as it relates to power is changing. The operating environment is fast improving. We welcome investors, American investors who want to invest in Africa. We like the fact that American investors today are beginning to talk about investment in Africa and not about aid in Africa. And we like the fact that the narrative is changing about Africa. So to me, it's a worthy and very good trip so far.
Yeah. You know, when you talk about that narrative, first it was aiding Africa a few years ago. Now it's one of the fastest growing areas in the world, and also a place where people are making a lot of money. When you go out to talk with business people in the United States or any other place, what's your sales pitch? How do you change that image that they have to what's happening today?
The population, Africa's population is rising, and income per capita is increasing also. And the interesting thing about the nature of our population, the dividend of the Africa's demographic structure, is that you have 65% of Africa represented by people who are under the age of 35. You can tell what this means for investors, especially in consumer good sector. So there's quite a lot, and people can see indeed that a lot is happening on the continent. Return on investment is very high, and we represent that because through our investments in Africa, we see this kind of returns, and our investors and partners are beginning also to take note of this. So we don't have to sell much again.
Mm-hmm. Let's start, I kind of want to go back further a little bit into your first claim to fame, which was turning around Nigeria's Standard Trust Bank. Why did you do it? How did you do it?
I grew up with certain beliefs and certain motivations. And when you envision and take position and that vision comes through, then significant opportunities crystallize. And that is what drove our interest initially in taking over a distressed bank. We saw a banking industry that was growing very fast, and we didn't think the requisite human capital capacity was available to support the continued existence of these banks. And so we took early position in putting in place a company that would help to guarantee the survival of banks. And so when an opportunity presented itself, we were ready for it. We took advantage of it, we turned it around, we grew value for shareholders, and when we needed more capital to do other things, people were ready to invest in us because we delivered value.
Where did you get the initial capital?
The initial capital came from SELF, ourselves, the group of initial investors that came together. But it was little money. It was we invested about $5 million at the time. But we also did a debt equity swap. So we did a lot of creative initiatives were put in place.
After the acquisition of the distressed financial institution in 1997, Elumelu was appointed CEO of what became Standard Trust Bank, making him Nigeria's youngest CEO of a commercial bank at the time, according to Forbes magazine.
The biggest challenge then was, you see 34-year-old people running a bank, or 34-year-old person running a bank in an environment where banks were run by one, expatriates, and two, by people who were like in their 60s and married. And so you see a young man running a bank, so you would not give them the slightest benefit that they will succeed. And so we had to deal with that. But ultimately, with time, as we performed, the kind of skepticism people had initially transformed to respect and admiration, and people who initially didn't want to invest in us and what we stood for became proponents of our turnaround expertise and ability to grow value for shareholders.
Under Elumelu's leadership, Standard Trust Bank was restored to profitability. And in 2005, he orchestrated a mega merger with Nigeria's third largest bank, United Bank of Africa. Elumelu became the CEO of the entity, which grew to a multinational bank. But because of a 2010 policy set up by the Central Bank of Nigeria limiting the tenure of bank chiefs, he had to step down after 5 years.
We transformed the bank from a Nigerian bank, one country bank, to a Pan-African bank that today operates in 19 African countries, including United States of America, Paris, and London, serving over 7 million customers across the continent. So for us, or for me, moving on after 13 and a half years was a natural course of action. After serving for 13 and a half years, and after putting in place a robust succession plan with competent deputies, it was not difficult to move on.
Elumelu would have continued success in the next phase of his career, but to understand the principles that have guided him to that success, you have to look at his upbringing.
What my dad always told us when we were growing up, that if you earn $1 and you don't save anything, if you earn $1 billion, you won't save anything.